My millionaire parents kicked me out for going to community college. 18 years later, I won a $2 million award that my father unknowingly funded. And what I did with that money left them broken. I'm 37 years old. I'm a professor at Cambridge University with a PhD in environmental chemistry. And last week, something happened that still has me processing everything. Like I can't stop thinking about it. I went to a gala, one of those fancy things where they give you awards and recognition for your research work. And I basically came face to face with my parents after 18 years of not speaking to them. 18 years. And the thing is, it wasn't a happy reunion like in the movies, but rather awkward and bitter, and honestly left me feeling a ton of emotions that I thought I'd gotten over a long time ago. I guess I should start from the beginning so this makes sense. I grew up in a well-off family. My father owns Mosaic, a pretty big fertilizer company, and my mother was basically a socialite who spent her time organizing charity events and going to lunches with her friends. From when I was little, I always knew I had to meet certain expectations. Good grades, perfect behavior, go to the right university, marry the right person. Everything had to be impeccable, because that's how things worked in my family. My father always said that we Chambers weren't common people, that we had a legacy to maintain, and I grew up believing that, believing I had to be perfect for them to love me. But then high school came and something in me broke. I don't know how to explain it exactly. It was like all the pressure accumulated and I just couldn't take it anymore. I started having trouble getting out of bed, concentrating in class, doing homework. Now I know it was depression. But at the time, nobody called it that. My parents just thought I was being lazy or rebellious. My grades started dropping. I went from being an honors student to barely passing classes. And every time I came home with a report card, my father looked at me like I was a total disappointment, like I had failed at something fundamental. My mother didn't even bother looking at me most of the time. She just sighed and said things like, "Oh, Sophia, I don't know what we're going to do with you." Like I was a problem that needed solving. The only person in my family who didn't make me feel like trash was my Aunt Lydia, my mother's younger sister. Lydia was like the black sheep of the family. She'd been divorced twice, worked as an artist, lived in a small apartment instead of a huge house, basically everything my family considered unacceptable. But she was warm and funny and listened to me when I talked, and she never made me feel like I had to be someone else for her to love me. She used to tell me it was okay not to have everything figured out, that I was young and had time to discover who I wanted to be. I wish I'd listened more to Aunt Lydia back then. So anyway, my senior year of high school came, and I basically applied to universities without much hope. My grades were mediocre. My extracurricular activities were non-existent because I'd spent the last few years barely surviving. And honestly, I didn't even know what I wanted to study. The rejection letters started arriving one after another. Stanford rejected, Harvard rejected. Even the more modest state universities told me no. The only acceptance I received was from the local community college, and when I showed my father that letter, I thought he was going to explode. He turned red, like completely red, and started yelling about how it was possible that his daughter, a Chambers, was going to end up at a community college with a bunch of losers and failures. I remember exactly what he said because those words stayed engraved in my mind. I didn't spend thousands of dollars on your education for you to end up being mediocre. I was 19 years old when my father kicked me out of the house. It was in April, like 2 months before graduating from high school. We'd had another fight about college. I was trying to explain to him that I could go to community college for 2 years and then transfer to a 4-year university, that it was a valid option, and a lot of people did it, but he didn't want to hear anything. He told me I had until the end of the day to pack my things and get out of his house, that he wasn't going to support someone who clearly didn't value the opportunities they'd been given. My mother was standing there in the kitchen and didn't say absolutely anything, didn't even try to defend me or calm the situation. She just looked at me with that cold expression she had and then went to her room. I called Aunt Lydia crying and she came to pick me up with all my stuff in trash bags because they didn't even let me use suitcases. He literally threw my clothes and my books and everything into trash bags like it was garbage. I stayed with Aunt Lydia in her 1-bedroom apartment for the next 2 years. I slept on the couch, worked at a diner as a waitress to help with expenses and to pay for community college, and basically tried to rebuild my life from scratch. I'm not going to lie to you. Those were hard years. Like really hard. There were days when I thought my father was right, that I was a failure and would never amount to anything. But Aunt Lydia kept telling me I had potential, that I just needed time to find myself. And eventually, something changed. It was in my first chemistry class. I don't know what it was exactly, but something about the way everything worked, the way molecules interacted and transformed, just made sense to me in a way nothing else had before. My professor was Dr. Collins, an older guy who had taught at big universities before retiring and then coming back to teach at community college because, according to him, the students there were more interesting. I remember that after my first exam, where I got a 92%, he called me to his office and told me I had a natural talent for chemistry, in that he could see. I really understood not just the formulas but the concepts behind them. I cried in his office. I don't know why. Exactly. I guess because it had been so long since someone told me I was good at something that I just couldn't hold it in. From then on, everything changed. I focused completely on my chemistry classes, stayed extra hours in the lab, helped Dr. Collins with basic research projects, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose, you know? It wasn't just that I was good at chemistry, but I was passionate about it. I got excited learning new things and solving problems and understanding how the world worked at a molecular level. I finished my 2-year program with honors, literally with a perfect average in all my science classes, and transferred to a state university to complete my bachelor's degree in chemistry. My bachelor's graduation was like 14 years ago. I was 23 at the time, I think, and it was one of those bittersweet moments because I was super proud of what I'd achieved, but at the same time, it hurt that my parents weren't there. I sent an invitation to the house. I don't know why exactly. I guess part of me still hoped they would come, that they would see I had achieved something important despite everything. Obviously, they didn't come. Aunt Lydia was there in the front row screaming my name when I walked across the stage, and that meant everything to me. But I can't say it didn't hurt to see other students with their complete families there, celebrating while I only had my aunt after graduating. Dr. Collins, who had become something like my mentor, recommended me for a research opportunity at Oxford University. Oxford, in England. It was an incredible position working in environmental chemistry, specifically in the development of more sustainable fertilizers that were less harmful to the ecosystem, and when they accepted me, I basically couldn't believe it. Aunt Lydia helped me pack, drove me to the airport, and told me she was so proud of me and to go conquer the world. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving. They didn't even know I'd applied to Oxford, and honestly, I didn't feel like I had to tell them anything. After years of silence, England was like a total fresh start. I completed my master's in 2 years, then stayed for the PhD, which took another 4 years. And during all that time, I immersed myself completely in my research. My work focused on developing ecological alternatives to traditional chemical fertilizers, on finding ways to maximize agricultural production without destroying the soil or contaminating water sources. It was ironic, I suppose, considering my father had made his fortune selling exactly the type of fertilizers I was trying to replace, but I never thought much about it. My research was important. I was contributing to something that really mattered, and that was enough. After finishing my PhD, I was offered a position as a professor at Cambridge University, and I've been there for like 5 years now. I publish papers regularly, supervise graduate students, collaborate with researchers around the world, and honestly, I've built a pretty good life here. I have friends, I have a nice apartment near campus, I have a job I love. Basically, I have everything I need. Aunt Lydia visits me a couple times a year. We message all the time, and she's essentially my only family. From my parents, I heard nothing all these years. Like 15 years without any kind of contact. And honestly, I reached a point where I didn't even think about them most of the time. But anyway, back to last week and this blessed gala. It was a big event organized by an international foundation that supports scientific research, and I was nominated for an award for my work on sustainable fertilizers. I didn't really expect to win. There were other incredible researchers nominated, so I went more because it was expected that I be there. You know? The event was in London. Super elegant with long dresses and tuxedos and all that stuff. And when I arrived, I was basically on autopilot, smiling and greeting colleagues and trying not to feel uncomfortable in the formal dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. And then I went to the bathroom during the cocktail hour before dinner, and there was my mother. We literally ran into each other at the sinks, and for a second, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, staring. She looked older, obviously, but she still had that expression, that cold look she always had. I didn't know what to do, whether to say something or just run out. And finally, she said Sophia, with that soft voice she used, like surprised but not really surprised. I just said hello, and there was this super awkward silence where neither of us knew what to say. She asked what I was doing there, and I told her I was nominated for an award for my research, and she made that sound she always made, like a slight, that didn't really mean anything. Then she said my father was also there, that they were sponsors of the event, and I felt like the floor opened up beneath me, because I had no idea they were going to be there. Nobody had told me anything. I went back to the main hall feeling completely unsettled. I looked around, and sure enough, there was my father at a table near the front, talking to other important people, looking exactly like I remembered him, just with more gray hair. He hadn't seen me yet. Or at least he was pretending not to have seen me. And I basically hid at my table at the back of the hall, trying to process the fact that after 18 years, I was in the same room as my parents and had no idea how to feel about it. The dinner was endless. I couldn't even taste the food because my stomach was in knots. And the whole time I was aware of where my parents were in the hall, whether they were looking at me, what they must be thinking. And then came the moment to announce the award winners. There were several categories: chemistry, biology, physics, medicine, and each award came with recognition and an amount of money to continue the research. When they got to the environmental chemistry category, the presenter started talking about the winners' work, about innovative research in sustainable fertilizers, about significant contributions to the field, and I was basically dissociated from the situation because it sounded like my work, but it couldn't be, right? And then they said my name. Sophia Chambers. The whole hall started applauding, and I sat there for a second, unable to move until the person next to me touched my arm and told me I had to go up on stage. I walked to the front in a kind of fog, received the award, which was like an elegant plaque, and the presenter kept talking about my work and how the research had the potential to transform sustainable agriculture globally. He said the award included a grant of $2 million to continue the research. $2 million. And I literally couldn't process that amount of money. I was standing there on stage with the lights shining in my face, trying not to cry when I looked toward where my father was and saw him get up from his table and leave the hall. He just left, like in the middle of the announcement while everyone was applauding, and something in my chest tightened because even now, even after everything I'd achieved, he couldn't stay to see me receive an award. After the ceremony, there was a reception where winners had to talk with sponsors and foundation members, and that's where I found out the part that left me completely devastated. One of the organizers came to congratulate me and casually mentioned how generous Mosaic, my father's company, had been in funding my grant specifically. I didn't understand at first. I asked him to repeat what he'd said, and he explained that the $2 million came directly from Mosaic Fertilizers, that my father had specified he wanted to fund research in the field of sustainable fertilizers, and my project had been selected. He gave me all this information about how the sponsorship worked, about how it was a philanthropic donation that helped with the company's taxes, basically talking and talking while I tried not to throw up right there. I left the reception and found my father outside the venue, smoking a cigar even though I know my mother always hated him smoking. I walked up to him without really thinking about what I was going to say, just knowing I needed to talk to him, that I needed to understand why he would do this. He saw me coming and didn't move, just stood there with the cigar in his hand looking at me with that expression he had, that mix of contempt and something else I couldn't identify. I asked him why he had funded my grant, if he clearly didn't care enough to stay to see me receive the award. He took a long drag on his cigar and then said something I'll never forget. He said he hadn't done it for me, that he'd done it because it was good for business, because Mosaic needed to improve its public image on environmental issues, and funding sustainable research was an axarium asca, easy way to do it. He said it had been pure coincidence that my project was selected, that he didn't even know I was nominated until he saw my name in the event program. And this is what really killed me. He said he hoped that at least now I could do something useful with my life, instead of continuing to be a disappointment. I stood there not knowing what to say, because what do you say to that? I'd spent 18 years rebuilding myself, overcoming depression, working myself to exhaustion, getting degrees and publishing research and becoming a professor at Cambridge, basically achieving everything that supposedly mattered, and it still wasn't enough for him. He still saw me as a disappointment. My mother came out at that moment, looked at me briefly, and then told my father they should leave, that it was already late. Neither of them said congratulations. Neither asked about my life or my work, or if I was okay after all these years. They just went to their car and left me standing, there in the street with my award in hand, feeling emptier than I'd felt in years. I returned to Cambridge the next day and basically locked myself in my apartment for 3 days, processing everything. Aunt Lydia called me like 1,000 times. I finally answered and told her everything, and she was furious, like really angry with my parents in a way I'd never heard her before. She told me I didn't owe them anything, that I'd achieved all this in spite of them, not thanks to them, and that I didn't have to accept their money if I didn't want to. And she was right. Honestly, I didn't have to accept it. So last week, I contacted the foundation and donated the entire grant, the full $2 million. I established a scholarship fund specifically for low-income students who want to study science but don't have family support or the means to do it. Students like me 18 years ago, working at a diner and trying to pay for community college. I named it after Aunt Lydia, the Lydia Chambers Science Scholarship Fund, because she was the only one who believed in me when nobody else did. I didn't tell my father I was going to donate the money. I don't owe him any explanation, but I guess he'll eventually find out when he sees that his philanthropic donation went directly to helping exactly the type of students he considered losers and failures. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? His money helping the next generation of kids who were rejected and discarded, but have potential if someone gives them a chance. I still don't know how I feel about all this. Honestly. There are days when I'm proud of myself for having donated the money, for standing firm in my principles. And there are days when I wonder if I should have taken the money and used it for my research. Because at the end of the day, it's important research that could help the planet. But I think I did the right thing. Or at least the right thing for me. I don't need my father's validation, I don't need his money, and I definitely don't need to have him in my life. If after all this time he still sees me as a disappointment. Aunt Lydia came to visit me this weekend. She brought me flowers and wine, and we stayed up late talking about everything. She told me she's proud of me. Not just for my academic achievements, but for the person I've become. For my strength and my integrity. And you know what? I think that's enough. I can't control what my parents think of me. I can't make them love me or make them regret kicking me out. But I can control who I am and what I do with my life. And honestly, I think I've done a good job with that. I'm still teaching at Cambridge, still doing my research, although now without the $2 million. But well, there are other funding sources, and I'm still living my life surrounded by people who value me for who I really am. And maybe someday I'll fully process what happened at that gala. What it means to have seen my parents after so many years only to confirm that they're never going to change, that they're never going to be the people I needed them to be. But for now, I'm okay, I suppose. I have my work, I have Aunt Lydia, I have a group of brilliant students who remind me why I do what I do, and that has to be enough.